Hi, my name's gwEm and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I want to talk about the Korg Volca Nubass. In the album that I'm working on, which is called Live from Cyberspace, a few people were a little bit surprised that I was using the Volca Nubass rather than a 303. And I think the Volca Nubass is a really good unit, and I'm going to go into that now. But first of all, I want to explain why I chose that. Now, I think that the Volca Nubass is being slept on a little bit. People seem to be comparing it to the original Volca bass, which is understandable when you think about the name, but honestly, I think it's a very different unit. The reviewers are missing the point. This is a very specific and targeted machine. It's really only for doing acid bass lines, and it does that really well. I actually think that it's the best Korg Volca, at least that I've tried. I've not tried all of them, but I have tried most of them. And the reason I think that is that within the space of doing acid lines, it really doesn't have any limitations. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm kind of putting shade on the Korg Volcas. I've got a few. But some of the units in the series, they're missing one or two things that would make them really great. So as an example, I think the Volca Beats is great, but it's missing an accent feature and it's missing pattern chaining. And if it just had those things, then I think it would be such a much more useful machine than it is. But I still like it. I still think it's cool. And if you look at the jams that people are doing with the Volcas online, they're amazing. But I just found the earlier models a little bit limiting, at least for me. But this Volca Nubass doesn't have any limitations that I can't work around, and so for that reason I'm saying that at the moment I think it's the best Volca. It really does have everything you need to make really cool acid lines. So what I'm going to do now is I've got this list here of points, and I'm going to run through them and explain why I really like the Volca Nubass. I'm going to focus on the unit itself so you won't have to look at me anymore. So here it is, the Volca Nubass. And I've got hooked up the best drum machine ever made, which is obviously the Roland TR-707. But let's talk about the Nubass first, and we'll bring the 707 into it later. So the first and most obvious thing about the Nubass is that it's got this kind of dome thing here, and underneath it there's a couple of these NuTubes, which are technology that Korg has invested in. People say that these NuTubes are a gimmick, but the results are good, so I'm keeping an open mind as to whether they are. Let's show you some of the things that are unique about the NuTubes. So we'll switch it on. So the first thing that you notice is that it takes a lot longer than most other boxes to switch on. That's because the NuTube is warming up. And that's just like a normal vacuum tube. Now the NuTubes are used for a couple of things. They're used for the oscillator, and they're used in the drive circuit. I find that the oscillator on this thing sounds like incredibly fat. I don't know if that's the NuTubes or what, but I'm perfectly happy with the sound of the oscillators. So let's give you a quick demo of that. Now that's without the sub-oscillator at all. Let's bring in the sub-oscillator. You can hear that burbling away an octave below. You can bring saturation into the sub-oscillator. Now the saturation on the sub-oscillator can sometimes be a little bit subtle, and it can be hard to hear. This is one of the examples where it is. But if we transpose everything up, you'll be able to hear that much more. I think you can hear nicely there that it's just making that sub-oscillator sound more full. Now there's also a drive circuit which is using the NuTubes, so I'll switch off the sub-oscillator for now. Now at this stage again the drive is being a bit subtle. Now if I bring up the filter resonance you will definitely hear the drive circuit kicking in. Again, it's still subtle, you can definitely hear that though, there's no doubt. But I really like it, it's just adding a richness to the sound of the instrument. So that is the NuTubes. Now I've started talking about the oscillators, so let's talk about them a little more. The sub-oscillator that it's got, in combination with the 24 dB filter, kind of means you can get SH101, MC202 sounds out of it, which I think is quite cool. Now by doing function and 1 here, it's listed so you don't have to remember this obscure combination. You're supposed to be able to change from a sawtooth wave to a square wave. Now honestly, this is probably the main failing of the unit, but there's not much difference between the sawtooth wave and the square wave. The square wave doesn't give you that hollowness that you want. So it's definitely squarish, but it doesn't have that kind of hollowness that a real 303 does. So I generally just leave it on the sawtooth, which is fine. I've touched on the filter already. This is a 24 dB filter. I have mixed feelings about 24 dB filters because I sometimes find them a little bit too peaky. So you do need care. Now on the other hand, the other most common type of filter is a 12 dB filter, which isn't really peaky enough for acid lines. So you can definitely do acid with a 24 dB filter. The SH101 has a 24 dB filter. Now the TB303 has a filter which is a bit unusual. It sits in between the two. It's an 18 dB filter, and for me that is perfect. I would have every synth with a 18 dB filter if I could. I don't know why more synths don't have it, but that's just the way it is. However, with a 24 dB filter you can still do very good acid, but it does need care, because if you go too far then it doesn't sound very good, and I'm going to show you that now. If you just turn up the resonance, which they've called peak here, it doesn't sound very good. It's just a bit too resonant. Now, it doesn't sound too bad there, but if you bring the envelope in, the resonance actually goes into a range above human hearing, so you can't hear it, and it's all very well having that kind of aggressive screech, but if you can't hear it there's no point, so you do have to be a little bit careful with how you set it. So I set the resonance just a hair below maximum. Because it's a 24 dB filter, it is a bit peaky, so on the 303 you've got a nice range at the top where you can kind of dial in the resonance as you like. But you find that this 24 dB filter, every 24 dB filter is the same, it's not just the Nubass. It quickly goes from not enough resonance there to too much resonance. So you need to tweak it carefully, and you can just hear it coming in there. The same goes for the envelope. Now we want some envelope, we want that decay to give the acid sound. Decay and envelope controls do need a bit of care when you set them. You want to have the envelope coming in and decaying the cutoff, but not so much that the resonance goes into the supersonic range. a sweet spot there where you can kind of hear it kicking in. It's not full, it's about halfway. Now I want to set the decay on my envelope up. So I find the easiest way to do this is just to reduce the cutoff until you can start to hear the envelope kick in. So you can hear there's a little kick at the start of the note, which is the decay of the envelope. So then I can bring up the decay until it sounds as I'd like. Somewhere around there probably sounds good. So now what you'll find is when you adjust the cutoff, you have an extremely wide range of usable values. And actually now nearly the entire range of the cutoff dial is usable. Now if you'd just gone in like a bull in a china shop, set the resonance on max, set the envelope depth on max, you wouldn't have that range of control. You'd find that cutoff knob was only kind of working in a certain range. And that's because of this 24 dB filter. It does need a bit more care when you set it up. But when you do, it screams a lot more than an 18 dB filter. So while we're talking about adjusting the cutoff, this thing actually has an LFO, which the 303 doesn't. So you can apply the LFO to the cutoff and use it like a third hand, if you like, to tweak the cutoff while you are playing. So I've just enabled the cutoff on the LFO. Then by using the function button and these two knobs here, I can bring in the LFO depth and the LFO rate. So we're aiming for a sweep of the LFO from a low to a high amount without going too high or too low. I need to set the cutoff into an intermediate position because the LFO will bring that higher and lower than the middle position of this cutoff. Now you can hear there it's too much, it's going too high and it's going down too low, so I can reduce the depth. Now somewhere there you can hear that the full range of that LFO sweep is usable even when it's at minimum or maximum, so what I'm going to do now is reduce the rate. That's given us the perfect acid sweep. So before I get on to talking about the sequencer, there's a really cool thing about the Nubass that no one's talking about. Now when you use a 303, you can use the transpose feature, but it's slightly awkward because when you switch patterns, it resets the transpose back to 0. You can use the tuning control to transpose your pattern, but again you've got like a slightly weird range. I think it's plus or minus about 5 semitones, so it's quite hard to get a full octave of transpose, and you have to use a guitar tuner to set the right spot on that tuning range. Now with this, it's really easy to transpose, so what you just do is press the function button, and then when you adjust the pitch knob, you can see how many semitones up or down it's transposing, and that's such a joy if you're used to using a real 303. The other thing is that this thing will apparently automatically tune itself if you just leave it, so it's always going to be in tune. If you're using a real 303, you have to stay on top of the tuning, particularly if the room is getting hotter during your set. You do notice that it does drift a little bit out of tune sometimes. And I've jumped jams and I've noticed that it's going out of tune, and people have commented on that. I know you have to have a good ear, but some people do, and it does annoy them. Now let's talk about the sequencer. So I think the sequencer is absolutely brilliant. It's a kind of combination between a real 303 and Rebirth. It's got step and real-time entry of notes. I normally use step, but it's good to have real-time. Now on a Real 303 you mostly use the step mode because although it does have a kind of a real-time note entry mode, it works in kind of a weird way. Now the part which is similar to Rebirth is you can use these random functions for transpose, which will transpose up 1 or 2 octaves, the accent and slides, and you can choose a fast or a slow slide, but generally I just use one. And it's good you can randomize those because it does give you a bit of inspiration. It doesn't create a completely random pattern, you still have to enter the notes, but I think that's actually quite good because then you can make sure your notes are in a meaningful key. What you've also got, which is similar to Rebirth, is the ability to shift your pattern backwards and forwards. Now that's dead handy because you find that you've created a pattern that sounds really good, but your brain has tuned into the pattern starting somewhere in the middle. So when you add a drum machine, what you find is that it doesn't sound anything like how you imagined it. So you can then use the shift button to get it to go to where you think the start of the bar should be. Anyway, let's do a little example of how you can compose an acid line using this. So what I'm going to do is do erase all. Now that's now erased everything. So I'm going to go into the step record mode. And I'm just going to enter some notes to go from 1 to 16. You can make quite intricate acid lines, but I often find that the most simple ones only use a few notes in the scale. So that's what I'm going to do now. Let's come out of step record, you press the function button. Let's just hear what we've got. Turn off the LFO just for now. Now that's not a particularly interesting acid line, but that's where your accents and slides and transposes come in. Let's go into the slides first. I'll use the random feature just to give a starting point. Now you can see it's put 2 slides in here and here. Let's just see how that sounds. That sounds good. I'm going to keep them. I'm going to change this long slide for a short slide though. That's already sounding a bit more spicy. All I've done is to add an extra slide here. Let's try messing with the accents. So I'm going to put some random accents in and then I'll tweak them. Now, just like on a Real 303, if you put an accent where you've got a slide, you can't always hear the accent very well, so this one is being kind of wasted. But that one sounds good, and I'll put a couple more in. Sounding a bit more funky already. You can adjust the amount of accent using this knob here, but maybe I'll reduce that a little bit. And finally, the transpose command will allow you to step some of these things up by an octave, or you can do 2 octaves. So if you just press it once, you can see the LED there is lit. And if you hold it down, it actually starts flashing. So the flashing indicates that it's gone up by 2 octaves. And if it's constant, then it's only gone up by 1. Let's just randomize the transpose, see how that sounds, and then mess around with it. So we've got 1 octave transpose on the 7 and 2 octaves on the 14. I think there sounds good. Let's put the LFO back on. That's a decent acid line. You could definitely use that in a jam. Let's hook up the 707 now. So like the other Volcas, it can take MIDI sync. It doesn't have MIDI out. I know that you can modify these things. I've modified my Volca Beats to have MIDI out, but I don't think I'll modify this one because I'm quite attached to it. I don't want to mess it up. So I've got the rim shot from the 707 going on every 8th note, and I'm going to put that into the sync in. And that will now lock onto the new bass. So when I press play, that will start the drums, and then I can press play in time with that and it will start. I'll probably easier just to show you. So the Volca Nubass stays perfectly in sync, and it sounds really good with the 707 as well, I think. And that brings me on to the last two features that I wanted to discuss, which is the fact that this has a swing and also the active step. So I don't care much for swing when I do acid kind of tracks. But this does have it, so if it floats your boat, you can mess around with that. I'll just give you a little demo without syncing it to the 707. So if you want to create swung 303 sequences, you can do that. You just press function and adjust that tempo dial. Now I didn't think I'd use this feature because, you know, I find polyrhythms a little bit esoteric, but it does create some quite cool variations. So I'll start the 707 in a minute. So this is on the active step mode. You do shift and then active step. So if the step is lit, then it will play, and if it's not lit, then it will just skip past it. It won't play no note, it will just skip past it. So it will go from 1 to 15 and back again. That 16 won't sound, it won't be a gap or anything like that. It's literally only playing 15 notes there. And this is very useful in a jam context. So I'll start the 707 and you'll see how handy it is. So for example, if you've got a sequence on the 707 which is a 4 to the floor, like I've got here, and you only have 15 steps rather than 16, then it will go out of sync by 1/16th note each time, which sounds like there's a changing acid line over time, which is quite cool. And you can mess around with the active steps while it's playing, and it generally sounds quite good. So let's give you a little demo. So that's quite cool. You can create a whole series of acid lines really just from one 16 step pattern. Clearly this thing is very small and convenient. It's less than half the size of a real 303. It runs on AA batteries as well, so that's handy. And basically I'm really pleased with it. Well, I hope that video on the Volca Nubass, kind of a review or just kind of repping it really, was interesting. If you did like it, then hit that like button, and I'm aiming to try and get to 1,000 subscribers, so if you could help me out with that by subscribing, that would be brilliant as well. Thanks a lot, and see you in another video soon.